to the Coders Campus podcast, where you'll learn how to code from one of the best teachers in the industry. Whether you're an absolute beginner or a seasoned pro, the Coders Campus podcast will teach you what you need to know to master the art of programming. And now, your host, Trevor Page.
Ladies and gentlemen, my fellow coders, welcome to this brand new episode of the Coders Campus podcast. We've hit episode 4 now, and we will be diving into part 3 of our talk on Spring Data. So, like I said in our last post, or last episode, I should say, we were sort of tying things up when we were talking about the CRUD as it relates to Spring Data. So handling, your standard create, read, update, and delete sort of operations and whatnot. That's what we talked about in the last episode. So in other words, how to do the, you get basic things when you use Spring Data to create a repository. You extend something called a JpaRepository, which gives you access to things like findAll, which is a read operation, or findOne if you want to find just one of the rows from your database based on a, primary key or something like that. And saving and updating and deleting and all that good stuff we've already talked about. So do go back and listen to those episodes if you haven't already. Now, what about this episode? What are we going to be talking about again? What's left to talk about with respect to Spring Data? Well, the big thing that's left is talking about custom queries. So what happens if you need to do some sort of a read operation or an update operation on your code or on your data that doesn't exist as part of the default sort of CRUD operations that Spring Data gives to you? Well, that's where custom queries come into play. With custom queries inside of Spring Data, you can, do exactly what you could always do and go out and create whatever custom query your little heart could desire or whatnot, right? That's the whole point of Spring. They give you the ability to, or I should say Spring Data, gives you the ability to be as, custom as you need to be, but also gives you a nice sort of layer of the most convenient and the most commonly used queries right out of the box, right? So, how are we going to do this? How are we going to, use some examples with, custom queries, if you will? So we were talking in the previous episodes about something called a food diary. So we were keeping track, or we're creating a program that kept track of the food that we ate. What food did we eat? When did we eat it? How much did it cost? Was it for breakfast, lunch, dinner? Was it a snack? Those kinds of things. I created that code and we talked about it and whatnot. And it's actually available via GitHub. So this is not something I mentioned in my previous episodes, but it is now available and uploaded for free on GitHub. So you can go to the show notes page and you'll be able to see, usually at the bottom of the post is where I show the GitHub clone URL. So you can clone the GitHub repository, or you can just click through and just have a look at the code if you like. So like I said, that's at the bottom of the show notes pages. The show notes for this episode will be coderscampus.com/4, the number 4. And then you'll be able to see exactly everything that we're talking about right now. So, so we have this food diary thing that we have going on, this application, and within it is a food diary repository, which extends the JpaRepository. That's how we were able to create, make use of Spring Data. It's via extending JpaRepository. So we have a food diary repository, and just out of the box, like I said, it has all the default things, but we want to add some custom queries. So let's have a look at, or let's talk about what a custom query would look like. Well, since we're talking about queries, and queries deal with databases, that means that the code that we're going to be creating needs to be inserted into our existing food diary repository. Okay, repository means interacting with database, and that's exactly what we're doing when we're doing a query. We're interacting with the database. So what you use is something called the @query annotation. Okay, it's an annotation. This is, I've talked about annotations many times in previous episodes of the How to Program with Java podcast. If you're not familiar with the How to Program with Java podcast, that's the one I did before this one, and this is now the new, shiny and new and all sparkly and clean, if you will, podcast called the Coders Campus podcast. So there you go. You can get access to old episodes of the How to Program with Java podcast via coderscampus.com/podcast. In any case, I probably won't be mentioning that anymore. I think I mentioned it enough in the past, 3 episodes, and now this 4th one. So hopefully you guys are all caught up and you know what I'm talking about when I talk about the old podcast. Anyway, So we talked about annotations in the old podcast, and we're just creating an @query annotation. And this annotation is at sort of a method level. So we're going to create a method, and we're going to annotate that method with the @query annotation. So fair enough. And the method that we're going to create it has a certain way that it can be created in terms of the naming of the actual method. So the method name, when you're creating a custom query, is actually important inside of Spring. It's important because you can actually, by naming conventions, create a query without ever having to type in any SQL or HQL or whatever to create the query. You can actually do it just by naming it a certain way. By it, I mean the method, and Spring Data will, by convention, read that name and create a query for you based on the name of your method. So in other words, again, they're trying to make our lives as easy as possible. We don't have to go and type in, select star from this table where something equals this or that or the other thing. So we can do all of that. We can accomplish all of that just by naming our methods something special. So what is this something special that I'm talking about? Well, let's pretend that we're creating a new method inside of our interface, our FoodDiaryRepository interface. Since it is an interface in Java, we do not have to create the body implementation details, if you will, of our methods. We just need to create sort of a method stub, not even a stub, just the actual name of the method itself with whatever parameters, and we need to, specify if there's a return type or not. So just standard Java method declaration stuff inside of an interface. So we're going to create a public method, so public method that returns a list of food diary objects. Okay, because think about it. When we're creating a query, we want to query, let's say we want to find, we want to query the food diary entries, the food diary table, and we want to find meal types. So let's say the meal type where the meal type is equal to something. So, lunch or breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack. Okay, those are the 4 meal types that I've talked about, and let's say we want to search by those meal types. So we can actually create a method. That method is going to return a list of food diary objects because food diary represents a row in our database. That's our entity. Okay, that's what it is. It's a row in our database. So it's going to return a list of food diary items. And the name of the method is, remember, the special name of the method is findBy. Okay, so findBy. And then you type in the name of the instance variable that you'd like to search by. Okay, in this case, it's called meal type. Meal type is the instance variable name of our data type that we're storing inside of our database. Okay, it's called meal type. So we say find by meal type. And when we type it in as find by meal type, Spring Data will look at that and it says, okay, you want to create a select statement because you said find by, so it's a select statement. And then you want to do select star from the food diary table because you want to return a list of food diary items, and you're also inside of the food diary repository. So really it's because we're inside of the food diary repository that it knows to search that table, right? So, it could very well return a list of something else. So that, ignore what I said about returning a list of food diary and that's why it knows to search that table. No, it knows to search that table because we're inside of the food diary repository. So you're going to say find by. So it knows, okay, we're going to be doing a select statement. Find by meal type. So it's going to be a select star from food diary where meal type equals what? Well, this is where we pass in a parameter into our method. Okay, the parameter that we pass in will be the sort of dynamic wildcard thing that we're searching for when we're searching for that meal type. So we'll pass in the parameter section of the or the method signature, if you will, for this method. We'll pass in a string of meal type. So a string meal type, and that is essentially our entire method. So again, the method is annotate with @query. It's a public. It returns a list of food diary objects. It's called find by meal type, and we pass in a string called meal type as a parameter. So from there, Spring Data knows exactly what it needs to do. It will go in, it will execute a select star from food diary where meal type equals, and then whatever it is that was passed into that particular method when someone invokes the find by meal type method. And that's really all there is to it. We've now created a custom query that will find or search for or search inside of our food diary table for any meal types that, match whatever it is that we pass into it. All right. So now that begs the question, well, how do we use this then? Well, we use it in the same way that we would use the repository when we did a, findAll or a findOne, right? Instead of saying findOne, we use a repository. We say .find by meal type, and we pass in a string of the meal type that we want to search by. So a string of breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack, that kind of thing. Right? That is how we make use of it. Now, I don't want to get into the actual nitty-gritty of how I actually make use of it in my code, because, again, it doesn't really translate that well over a podcast, and this is all stuff that you would have seen before and you're familiar with anyway. So like I said, go to the show notes, coderscampus.com/4, and you'll see, not only will you see the actual code in there, but you'll also be able to download it via GitHub if you want to do that. Okay, so that's very basic. That's, find by, and then you type in the name of your instance variable that exists inside of your entity. You can do that for any of the variables that exist inside of your entity. Certain ones will be a bit tricky, like date types or time types, date and time. Those tend to be a bit tricky with getting the search to work correctly, or any custom object types that you have that you might have declared in there. That's things that are a bit tricky when you use those. But for the most part, it's pretty straightforward when you're doing searches with that kind of thing. One thing you can also do with this is, there's a whole bunch of things that you can do out of the box with Spring Data, but one of the things that would be common that you would use is perhaps doing like a searching, less than, greater than, or between a range of things inside of Spring Data. So that's, like I said, all well and good that we can find by a meal type, but what happens if we want to search for a range of data? So like, for example, we want to find all the meals that cost, between $10 and $20 or something like that. So that's entirely possible with Spring Data, and it's also just as easy as we'd already talked about, right? So if we wanted to create some of these sort of, searching for, greater than, less than, or between some, data points or whatever when it comes to searching by meal cost, we can do that. So again, we would create inside of our food diary repository, we would create more methods. These methods would be annotated with the @query annotation. Okay, that's how we flag. That's how we flag Spring Data to say, hey, this is a custom query that I'd like you to help me out with, right? Because that's the whole point. Spring Data helps you out by taking the naming of the method and turning it into an actual query, right? So we annotate with that query. We'll have another public list food diary, so it will be a public method. It will return a list of food diary objects. And now the naming convention. The naming convention is what matters here. So again, we start with find by. Okay, that's like the global, thing that we're going to be using when it comes to searching or doing read operations with Spring Data. Find by. So find by cost. All right. So if I say find by cost, that means that it's going to find by the instance variable called cost inside of the food diary entity. We have an instance variable called cost. Okay. If we did not have an instance variable called cost and we said find by cost, we would get a runtime exception. So when we started up our application, Spring would try to find the cost instance variable inside of our food diary entity, and it wouldn't be able to find it. Hypothetically speaking, if cost wasn't there, it wouldn't be able to find it, and we would get an error saying, Spring Data can't find this cost, variable that you're talking about. What the heck do you want from me, type of thing. So, but yes, we do have the cost in there, so that's why we say find by cost. And then here we can add more to the name of the method to do more fun stuff. So we'll say find by cost greater than. Okay, find by cost greater than means select star from food diary where cost is greater than, and then what? Greater than question mark, right? What is it that it wants to find that's greater than what? So that's where we pass in a parameter. Right? So inside of our method that we're creating here, we pass in a parameter. The parameter, the data type is a double, and the name is cost. You can name it whatever you like, but it makes sense to call it cost. And it's a double because that's what it's defined as inside of the food diary entity. We declared cost as a double in terms of its data type. Okay, so find by cost greater than, And then in parentheses, we pass in double cost. Okay, so it's finding by that cost. So select star from food diary where cost is greater than, and then the variable cost that we're going to be passing in at some point. Someone will pass it in when they invoke this method inside of the food diary repository. Simple as that. So, hey, how about doing it with a less than? It's just as simple as I'm sure you can imagine. Find by cost less than, and then you pass in a parameter, in this case, double cost. Again, you can name that parameter whatever you like. You can name it cost less than, or you can name it, dog poop if you really want to. But, for me, I named it cost, and that's what I felt made sense. So there you go. That's what I named it. Then also you can do a range query as well. So if you want to do more than just greater than or less than, if you want to combine those two, you can do a find by cost between. Okay? And when you say between, that kind of infers that there are a couple of parameters that are needed. And that is true. You need two parameters now, because one is going to be the lower bound, and the other one that you pass in as a parameter will be the upper bound. So for me, I said find by cost between, and I have a double min cost, so the minimum amount for cost, and then I do a comma, and then I do a double max cost. So a min and a max cost. And that's just when I invoke that, it's going to do a select star from food diary where cost is, less than min cost and greater than max cost. All right? Simple as that. We don't have to type in any SQL. I haven't had to type in a single line of SQL yet, or HQL, the Hibernate querying language. Didn't have to do it. There you go. Beautiful. So now we can take those queries that we just created, we can put them into action, right? So again, this is where I have some code on the show notes page, coderscampus.com/4, where you can go and peruse the code. I just created some methods in my controller to sort of invoke the food diary repository methods that we just created. So find by cost less than, find by cost greater than, and find by cost between. You'll be able to see the examples of that. It's really straightforward stuff. I'm just passing in a path variable into my request mapping for my Spring MVC stuff. If you don't know what Spring MVC stuff is and what everything I'm talking about with respect to request mapping, again, these are all topics I've covered before in past episodes of the old podcast, so you can go check it out if you like. And if you already are familiar with the stuff, then it shouldn't be anything. There's nothing funny going on here. It's all straightforward Spring MVC Java code. Nothing crazy going on. So check that out, and then you can go and you can actually play around with it. And I would encourage you to go and download, clone my GitHub repository, get the code going, run the app, start adding food diary items, and start playing around with how you can search for these food diary items using the appropriate URLs that I passed into my request mapping stuff, methods or request mapping annotations in my Spring MVC stuff in my controller, which I didn't talk about right now. If you don't know what I'm talking about, that's fine. I didn't specifically get into it in this episode. So like I said, go play around with it. I've got some examples on the show notes page of how you can go and query around. But the thing you need to know, the thing you need to understand from what I'm talking about is Spring Data allows you to use an @query annotation and create methods inside of your repository with specific naming conventions that allows you to create custom queries, whatever you like, to your heart's desire. That's it, right? Beautiful. Now, what happens if there's a situation where you want to create a query, but there are no sort of built-in Spring Data naming conventions that you can follow to create the query that you want to create? Okay, so that's cool. I get it. We all want to be, crazy coders, and we want to be able to, create some crazy queries if that's what we want to do. So let's say we're in a situation where we need to find out all the times we had pizza for lunch or spaghetti for dinner or something. So we had two things that we want to sort of combine together. Now I'm pretty sure we'd still be able to use Spring Data, the method naming convention, to create a query like this. You probably just need to say find by, let's see what I say, pizza for lunch. So that's meal type and, what's the other? Let me check and see what my other naming was. So I said food and meal type. So the food is pizza, the meal type is lunch. So we would create a, find by find by food and meal type is probably what we would type in. And I think that's how you can get away with it without having to create that custom HQL type query yourself. But let's just say that that is what we want to do. We don't want to use the standard Spring Data naming conventions. We want to create our own query. We want to type in our Hibernate query language stuff and pass it in and actually have it run our own custom query. So how would we do that? Well, it's as simple as, again, using the @query annotation. And instead of just having a blank @query annotation with nothing in terms of having something that you pass into it, you can pass in as a string value the actual Hibernate query language, query that you want to have executed. Okay, by Hibernate query language, I don't mean it's not a full C. It's a sort of a flavor of SQL, if you will. If you've never used it before, again, I've talked about this in past episodes of the How to Program with Java podcast, the old one. But just to sort of catch you up, it's just it's almost like combining Java objects into your SQL. That's kind of how it looks and feels, more or less. So whenever we're typing in our queries, you don't actually type in the full name of the table. So in other words, when we're querying the food diary table, you don't type in food_diary. You type in the Java representation of that object. So you type in food diary, all one word, with a capital F and a capital D, because that's what the food diary entity is called. It's called food diary, all one word, with a capital F and a capital D. So, for example, let's say we want to create this query. Like I said, we want to query by food type, or food and meal type. So we would create the @query annotation, and in brackets, we would pass in a string, and the string would say from, because with HQL, you don't have to say select star first, you just say from, saves you a little bit of typing, from food diary, again, capital F, capital D, no underscore, so from food diary, where, and then you type in, again, the name of the instance variable. What's the instance variable we want to search by? Food, Food, that's it. Beautiful. So, from food diary, where food equals, and then here's where you pass in like an HQL. I forget what these are called. It's just like a parameter. It's like a SQL parameter that you're passing in. It's a name that is a placeholder for a parameter or a value that you're going to be passing in later. So you're going to say, @query from food diary where food equals, and then you use colon, and then type in the name of your parameter. So for this example, I typed in food param. Again, you can name it whatever you like. It's kind of like a variable name. It's a parameter name, if you will. It's a placeholder for a value that you will be punching in later on when you actually are running and executing this particular query. So you just do colon food param. So that's the placeholder. And then you say and meal type, because again, you want to search by food and meal type. So we say and meal type, but meal type has a capital T, because remember, we're using the instance variable name for this particular query. So the meal type has a capital T when it's declared inside of the food diary object. So we need to make sure that we match that up. Okay, it wants it all to match up nice and neatly. So it's meal type with a capital T equals colon meal type param, because we're going to have a meal type parameter that we're going to be passing in there and substituting an actual value in there. So this is kind of like having, there's a couple of different ways to do this. You can have question marks in place of the parameters. So you could have said from food diary where food equals question mark and meal type equals question mark. But then that's just a little bit more complex on how you'd have to handle that. So that's why I use these, parameter names that I pass in. So I say food param and meal type param. Okay, so that's our query. We just, created our query. It's as simple as that. But there's more work that we need to do with this because we have parameters that we need to sort of map to something, because we have the food param and the meal type param that are sitting there. We need to tell Spring how to hook that all up. So to hook that all up, then we create our method. Okay, so it's the same thing. Public. It's a public method. It returns a list of food diary objects. The name of this method doesn't matter now. You can name the thing whatever you like, because we have specified a super custom query where we're actually passing in strings what the query is. Name it whatever you like. I named it find by food and meal type because that's just what I chose to name it. That's just what felt good to me, so that's what I named it. But then what's important is the stuff that you pass into the parameter method signature section, the parameters that you pass in. You need to tell Spring which of the parameters are mapped to which of the Java parameters are mapped to which of the SQL parameters. Okay, so in the SQL we said, colon food param, and we had colon meal type param. So we need to use Spring annotations again to map our Java parameters to those. So we're going to create a string food parameter, Java parameter, and we're going to annotate that with an @param annotation, @param, and we're going to tell it in brackets and in quotes what the name of that parameter is. So we need to match the name of the SQL parameter to the name inside of our @param annotation. I know this doesn't convert very well. Again, over audio, it's tough. I've already said this many times. You know already. You can go to the show notes page and check everything out. coderscampus.com/4. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about there. But you just say @param, and you pass in the name of the food param, which is, in quotes, food param. String food is the name of the parameter, comma, and then we pass in the meal type parameter. So we say @param meal type param, and that's a string meal type. Cool? So then that is the entire sequence of events. Again, once you see it, it's very simple once you see it in person. The only curveball here is that we need to annotate our Java parameters that we're passing in with the @param Spring annotation. The reason why we need to do that is because we specified SQL level parameters inside of our actual SQL query, or our HQL query. We specified those there. So we just need, Spring just needs to know how to map those SQL parameters to your actual Java parameters. Okay? That's how you do it. You use the @param annotation. And if you forget to do that, and you run the code, it'll just say, hey, I don't know what the heck this food param thing is. Can you help me out here? It'll give you some sort of an exception along those lines. So, pretty straightforward stuff. Really not that complex. Sure, there's some SQL that you needed to write, but this is SQL. You need to write the SQL when you have a really sort of, off-the-wall sort of unique type query that can't be handled by the standard Spring Data stuff. So this really doesn't happen all that often. All right? Really, really, really cool stuff. And of course, you'll see more code on how we can execute that method that we just created. But it's really quite simple. You just, say FoodDiaryRepository dot find by food and meal type, and you pass in your food and your meal type Java parameters, and you're off and running. So that's really it. There's a whole bunch more that you can do with Spring Data. There's a whole reference documentation that you can access via the docs.spring.io/springdata/blah blah 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 blah. So there's a link I have at the bottom of my show notes page where you can go and check out more about the Spring Data stuff and the reference documentation that shows you more stuff you can do. I mean, it shows you examples of how you can order your data. So it's just a matter of saying order by, ascending or descending when you are naming your method. It tells you how to search while ignoring the case. So if you want to ignore the case of your strings, it shows you how to do that. It shows you how to use distinct queries and so on and so forth. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you can do with Spring Data. But the stuff that we talked about today is the most common stuff, right? Finding by a specific variable type, or by a specific variable, I should say, or column, if you want to think of it as a column, that's fine too. Searching by a specific column, searching with greater than, less than, or between, and then, combining columns too. Search by this and that. Okay? Or you can create a search by this or that as well if you want to do an or. It's really not that complex. There you go. Really, really straightforward, really simple stuff. And super powerful. It saves us all the time of having to go in and create all these queries and all this code, doing transactions and opening your transaction and committing the transaction and rolling back and opening, database connections and passing in, all this garbage code that, I shouldn't say garbage code, but boilerplate code that it slows you down. It's really annoying to have to type that all in. Spring Data abstracts that away from us completely and uses, obviously, best conventions and whatnot for how to run those, and they make our lives so much easier. I absolutely love it. I can't sing the praises enough for the Spring.io team. I hope they have a nice, long, and illustrious career as a company that's churning out great open source code for us Java programmers to make our lives that much easier in the long run. So, cool. Like I said in the last episodes, I'm also running a competition, if you will, a contest for people who review this particular podcast. So if you leave a rating and review of this podcast on iTunes, take a screenshot of it. So you can go to iTunes, you can go to coderscampus.com/iTunes. That'll bring up the iTunes window. I'd suggest you do it on like your desktop or maybe your mobile phone or something. You can go there, open up the iTunes, and you can click on, I think there's well, let me take a look at it. So if I go, I'll type in coderscampus.com/iTunes on my computer. This is interactive stuff at its best. If you're on your computer, you need to say View in iTunes. There's a little blue button underneath the logo of the podcast. You need to say View in iTunes, and that should open it up in the iTunes app itself. And I wonder what it looks like on my phone. So let me go to my phone as well. But if you leave a rating and review, you will be entered. Like I said, take a screenshot of it and email it to me, Trevor at, what is my email address that I was giving out? Coders Campus? No, sorry. Trevor at craftycoder.com. Crafty Coder has no E in it. Do not type an E. If you type an E, it will not go to me, and you will not properly be entered into the contest. Trevor at craftycoder.com. So you can go to iTunes, leave a rating or review, and when you do so, take the screenshot of it, send it to me, and I will be sure to enter you into the contest. So to leave a rating review, I think, let me just see, if I type in Coders Campus and search for Coders Campus as a podcast, there it is. I love seeing that pop up. You can go, and there's a ratings and reviews, almost like a tab. Just look for the words rating and reviews. You can click on there and then click write a review. Click write a review, and you can leave a title for it, leave your actual review, and give me an honest review. If you want to give me 5 stars, that would be amazing. I obviously would love to have 5 stars. If you don't feel this is worth 5 stars, then by all means, leave honest feedback. I don't want to force you into something that you don't want to do. So, but if you do leave a rating and review, you'll be entered into a contest to win. Drum roll, please, if you haven't already heard this. I'm doing a $100 Amazon gift card giveaway. So I will give you, whoever wins, I will send you, again, hopefully I can do this digitally. I can send you the gift card via, hopefully, email. If not, then sure, I will ship it to you wherever you are in the world. $100 Amazon gift card, and there you go. And I'm also having a second and third place prizes for those who don't win first prize. You can also get a subscription to Coders Campus. So I'm giving away subscriptions to the Coders Campus membership area. You can get in, check it out. That has all of the latest and greatest courses, as well as all the past courses that I've ever created. So I've created courses on Java, SQL, specifically MySQL, JavaScript, Spring Security, on and on and on. I have tutorials on deep dives into data structures, full-blown examples of how you would create web apps from scratch using this stuff like Spring Boot and Spring Data, webinars on that. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you get inside of Coders Campus. You get access to assignments and tests, forums, so if you have problems and you get stuck on something and you need help, you don't have to go to something like Stack Overflow. You can go to my forums and you can get access directly to me, and I will help you out with whatever it is you're struggling with. So yeah, that's awesome. People love that, the ability to go and post in the forums. There's Facebook groups that you can join with Coders Campus. It's just an entirely massive community of programmers just like yourself who are learning how to become full-stack web application programmers with a focus on the Java programming language. So we'll give away 2 of those as well, 2 memberships to Coders Campus. And there you go. Those will be the prizes. First prize, like I said, $100 Amazon gift card. Second and third prize are the first 1 month memberships to Coders Campus, so you can go in there, check it out for yourself. So leave a rating and review for the podcast, take a screenshot of it, and then send it in to Trevor at craftycoder.com, and I will put you onto the list for the drawing of those prizes. So, sound good? Sounds good. So thanks so much for joining me for this episode. Again, coderscampus.com/4. That's where you can get access to all the goodies that we talked about in this episode. And please do go and leave a rating and review for the show. I would love you forever if you do that. So helps me get the word out for this podcast and helps it get growing bigger and bigger so that I can, really leverage this free stuff that I'm putting out and be able to keep it free from now until forever. Because everyone loves free stuff. So there you go. Thanks so much for listening. Take care of yourself. As always, happy learning, and bye for now.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Coders Campus podcast. But before you go, Trevor has a favor to ask you. In order to keep these episodes free, he'd love for you to leave a rating and review the podcast on iTunes. Just go to coderscampus.com/review to leave your own rating and review of the show. So if you have 30 seconds to spare right now, please help out by leaving a rating and review via coderscampus.com/review. It will ensure that you continue to get these awesome free podcast episodes each and every week. So if you like free swag, head on over to coderscampus.com/review. Happy learning!